Hey guys, welcome to Choke Points. And in this video, we're going to talk about something very, very interesting. So stay with me till the end because it's not going to be a very long video, but it is going to be a very important one because there's some interesting developments going on around the globe in the geopolitics. Okay. And this time, after a very long time, actually, after a very long time, after 3 years of Russia Ukraine war, there is some serious development that's happening. And we are going to talk about that. But before that, I want you to understand that there is even more bigger um, development that's going on is that European Union is inviting Russia to G7. And if you look into the history of G7 as such, you'll find that uh, the G7 history is kind of it starts with oil, and then after that, when it became G8, that's when it ties itself into Russian geography, Russian politics, and Russian economic situation, and Russia's geopolitical and geographical advantage. And that's when things get tricky. Okay, now what is all this I'm saying right now? Well, it's important, so stay with me till the end and we're going to definitely talk about some really, really interesting stuff. All right, so let's get started, and please do like and subscribe. All right, so let's go. Number one thing, see, so just recently that Europe has leaked a 28-point draft explicitly that proposes that inviting Russia back to G8. Yeah. The same document says that Russia should be reintegrated into the global economy. And the shift also contradicts a decade of Western policy and signals a strategic U turn. What is all this going on, right? So, first of all, let me actually show you the news before we move forward, okay? Let me show you the news and then to understand number one thing, let me give you a little bit of a history lesson here, okay? About the G7, then G8, and what's the possible uh thing is why the history has repeated itself at this point. Okay, see, G7 in 1973, then there was oil embargo that was imposed on the Western countries, especially the United States, uh, because of their support for Israel and all that. So they didn't like it and they imposed oil embargo, right? And that's when G7 was formed in 1975. For what? They form G7 so that they can control the oil production and oil prices globally. Okay. And after that, there were Cold War was still going on. And then back in 90s, actually, after the uh, Soviet Union basically disintegrated. So what happened? When Soviet Union fell, then around 1997, I believe, Russians were invited to the G7. Then it became G8. Now you have to understand that after Soviet Union fell, its economy went into shambles. Okay, the situation was so bad that even a cup of coffee would cost 5,000 rubles. Okay, and at that time, inviting Russia to G7 did not make any sense if you look into it. Why? Because G7 has been a so called economic bloc. That's what at least they portrayed themselves as. Okay. That, oh, we are just an economic bloc. We want to discuss these things and that thing. But why would you invite a country whose economy is already in shambles and a country that you have been wanting to destroy all along? So you have to understand that you have to know that at that time the president of Russia was Boris Yeltsin. Boris Yeltsin was nothing more than a Western lackey. He was a puppet that was planted over there in the system. And it is said that the whole entire invitation to Russia in the G7 primarily was a more of a payout to Boris Yeltsin so that he can make his money and get out or whatever. But I think that that's not the case. I think that there is no such thing as free lunch in this world. So get paying Boris Yeltsin out of the blue just like that, just because Soviet Union fell, especially when Soviet Union fell, then it was Mikhail Gorbachev was the president, right? So why would Boris Yeltsin will be the interesting guy or the point of interest? Boris Yeltsin came after that, right? So clearly that's not the case. That payout was because payout was the only reason. No, see, after that, the European Union has been eyeing Crimea and the natural resources in the Ukraine for a very long time. Okay. And historically, also, if you look into it, if you look at the history of Ukraine history of Soviet Union and all, you find that Ukraine has been invaded at least quite a few times. Okay. Ukraine was back in, say, 1180 or something when the Ukraine was actually formed. Uh, so at that time, uh, Ukraine had a history. I mean, Ukraine was formed, and then all of a sudden, Ukraine was attacked. Okay, Ukraine was attacked. Ukraine was attacked by who? Hungary and Austria and all these empires over there. So that's why, if you notice, that Western Ukraine has Austrian and Hungarian influence, and they consider themselves part of the West, whereas Eastern Ukraine does not. Eastern Ukraine was under Soviet Union occupation for a long time, so they always consider themselves Russian. Okay, and this is why Russia never had any intent of going further than whatever they have already captured. They just wanted to form a front line and then just defend that front line. That's about it. And considering that Ukraine's firepower is just not there enough to push Russians back, so there was no way Ukraine was going to actually take back what they have lost. Right now, so coming back to our point, G7 and G8. So so European Union always had this thing for Ukraine that somehow let's get the natural resources of Ukraine, and especially the Crimea. What Crimea actually provides? What Crimea provides is the lots and lots of natural resources, oil, the whole entire control over the Black Sea, and then entry into the Central Asia. So, and once you enter the Central Asia, then West can actually easy peasy take care of Iran as well. And then you can block any access for any Asian power to control or enter into the Mediterranean. Once you stop the entry into Mediterranean for any Asian country there, then what's going to happen? It will totally hurt the Asian economy. And guess what? Then Western powers will go back to their golden days, or so called. They can at least this way regain their control somehow. That's the grand plan. Okay. But the problem here is that this whole thing was read or understood right after President Putin actually took control of Russia. As soon as he became president, his entire plan was to basically take over Crimea. And that's what he did. Now, so now we are very clear on this, okay? And then Russia Ukraine war also didn't start out of the blue, actually. And Russians just didn't decide that, yeah, let's go today, January or February of 2022, we are going to attack. That's when stars are aligning properly. No. See, what happened is that up until that point, Russians had no I would say Russians were not getting any kind of inkling that would force them to actually attack Ukraine. But what happened then is that when the Western companies or corporations started to put their foot on the ground on the Ukrainian natural resources and all that too on the Russian side, whatever the Russia has captured now. So by November of 2021, they had started to pile up their hardware and everything else to start mining over there in those regions. and Russians were not going to have it. Okay. And that's why from November to December mainly, and January, they did a build up around along the border, and then after that in February they went in. And if, see, think about this, that if Russian goal was just to strike and teach Ukraine a lesson, they could have simply done air strike sorties and all that here and there, and that would have been fine. Or if they wanted to really kill those, or so called get rid of Nazis and all that, neo Nazis and whatnot, then they would have done that with the air strike too. But you directly go with foot on the foot soldiers and foot on the ground like that. That means that you are clear cut going to take the territory, and clearly you have a urgency that you want to apply, right? Because of that urgency, they did this thing. And the urgency was very simple, that there were lots and lots of Western companies that were piling up over there to start mining and everything else. And once that would have started, and then Ukraine would have joined the NATO, and then things would have been all out of hand of Russia. Okay. So, and Russians cannot let that happen. All right. So, having said that, now you see what exactly happened. President Trump was not talking about rare earth deal with Ukraine out of the blue. Okay. Then you look into European Union. European Union has been eyeing all the natural resources to push their climate change and climate control agenda, or whatever new economic model they are trying to come up with, they're trying to impose on the world. Okay. So all that is all linked to the Russia Ukraine war. Okay. And so now, what do we know? What we know is that most of the natural resources now are under Russian control. Okay. So this is the whole entire background and foundation for this whole entire video. Okay, I have laid the foundation now. Okay. Now, so at first, when the Russia Ukraine war started, then what happened? Number one thing that happened is that the sanctions were blindly applied on Russia. They thought the sanctions are going to work, but unfortunately, fortunately, or you can say strategically, Russians were prepared. They have been preparing for this thing war for a very long time. Okay, that's why they build all these partnership with all other countries, all other great powers that are there, and with that partnership, they knew that they're going to do this. Okay, and this was explained to their partners like China and India too, the repercussions of losing Crimea. Because if NATO can take over Crimea, then what's next for NATO? You have to understand that too. So balance is needed, right? And Chinese, now I will tell you this, the Chinese have been trying to enter Mediterranean through where? Through Kyrgyzstan, Kazakhstan, and then following into Tehran. And from Tehran, they were going to use Iran's help and its Shia Crescent corridor or Iranian corridor to get into Mediterranean. That's where the BRI was gonna go. Okay, so another plan was basically to cut off all those channels. And this is why, if you go look into all the maps and whatever has been going on, that is Georgia, mm, Armenia, Azerbaijan, mm, and then now US has just talked about what, Kazakhstan. Oh, Kazakhstan leader is such a great guy, this that. Those things are said not just out of the blue, they are said because there was a strategy involved in it. Okay, and anyways, so when sanctions were applied, sanction didn't work because simple thing I just to explain to you, right? Now, and then to backfill the whole entire vacuum created by the sanctions on Russia, US tried to sell the LNG to Russians, but sorry, to European Union, but that is very expensive affair. What that led to? See, what that led to is that it exposed entire renewable energy, the climate change, and all that mumbo jumbo hoax that European Union has been trying to push to the world so that they can come up with some sort of economic engine for their own benefit, and their companies that have been investing into all these things, so they can actually gain some money too. See, all these things are planned. Okay, this is not something that's happening because somebody cares about the climate or something, right? Nobody cares about the climate. Why? Because climate has been changing from since the dawn of the planet Earth. It used to be hot, then it became cold, then again it became hot, and this is a cycle that goes on and on. Okay, so anyways, so now when the climate change, all these agendas, they failed because of that. So the economy that was relying on this type of energy sources and all, think about it. If their renewable sources of energy were so good, then why do they need energy now all of a sudden? Why all of a sudden the LNG and petroleum and all those prices have gone up? Why they're not just simply using their renewable energy? Think about it. If that thing is so good, what's interesting here to note is that none of this, I mean, European Union has not been attacked by Russia at all. There is no war-like situation. I mean, in war-like situation, renewable energy is the first thing to go, right? So, so clearly, without even war, this thing has gone. So clearly, this is not just a sustainable energy the way they project it to be. It's sustainable development. That's what they call it. Okay. Now, and because of the lack of energy, the factories have shut down. Because of high energy costs, supply chain is disrupted, everything is gone. Now if you look into Germany GDP has been in negative. Italy's GDP has been pretty much stagnant, hasn't grown or hasn't gone down. Then you take France probably had a little bit of positive GDP, but that's not even actually, you can say that, yeah, this is awesome, right? So all that is happening too in European Union. Okay, now why I'm talking about all this, I'm talking about all these things is because of the whole 28 point things that we are going to talk about. Okay, all this is going to come in that. Okay, so that's why. All right, now let's discuss the 28 points real quick. Okay, so one second, let me see what's going on here. Anyways, so there you go. All right. So the draft includes reintegration of Russia into global markets, okay? And it proposes restoring the G8 with Russia included, and it includes cooperation on minerals, infrastructure, reconstruction. It mentions limits on Ukraine's future military capacity. It addresses NATO expansion and regional security arrangements. This structure clearly protects Europe's economic and energy interests. Okay. Now, let's look into the tables here. Okay. Now, first point is that Ukraine's sovereignty reaffirmed. Recognition of Ukraine as a sovereign state. That's fine. Comprehensive non-aggression pact. Russia, Ukraine, Europe enter a formal non-aggression treaty, meaning that they're not going to be aggressive towards each other. Now, you know what's fun part is that all these countries have signed all this kind of treaties one too many times. Okay, they sign it today, then they say something today, something, then next is something else. So that thing is just that it keeps changing. Now Russia will not invade neighbors. NATO stops expansion and addresses Russian security concern. No NATO expansion eastward. Now this point here, right here, this in itself is bogus point. I mean, even though yeah, it's there, but once again, if you look into it, Uh, first of all, NATO stops expanding. This was also discussed during the Reagan era too. But what happened? One too many times this has been discussed and it never stopped. Okay. And Russia will not invade neighbors. This has never stopped either. Okay. Now, so how much this is going to hold, only God knows. All right. But I can only give you the estimate of it. My estimate is that this will hold as long as Vladimir Putin is the president of Russian Federation. That's what it's all about. Okay, so unless President Putin finds a worthy successor, somebody like him, then that's a whole different story. But if not, then I can give you the guarantee right now. Okay, bookmark this video, that this is going to hold only for that time period. And this is why, in fact, when President Trump was in his election campaign, okay, President Trump in his election campaign also said that, oh, we can do a treaty, 18-year or 20-year treaty, where nobody will attack each other and this and that. Hmm? So why was that? Simply because they are saying that, hey, in next 20 years, President Putin will be gone, and then we will go back to a business as usual. That's the whole thing. Okay. Anyways, now US mediated Russia NATO dialogue, permanent security dialogue, de-escalation, cooperation mechanism, and this and that. All right, we will, only time will tell. Ukraine receives reliable security guarantees. Reliable security guarantees. Okay, external guarantees for Ukraine's future security. Actually, as a matter of fact, in 90s also, when Ukraine was formed, those guarantees was also back then also were provided. But guess what? There were no guarantees actually. How much of that actually worked? None. So, so now Ukraine armed forces capped at 600,000. Ukraine's armed forces capped at 600,000. First time they took Ukraine has to give its nukes. Well, but for another reason, because Ukraine couldn't maintain those things, and Ukraine never had the code for it either. So that's why. Now Ukraine armed forces capped at 600,000. So restricts Ukraine long-term military size. So why is that? This is because if Ukraine is a pretty large country compared to all other Ukrainian European countries, right? So Europe again wants to exploit Ukraine. Europe does not want to empower Ukraine. You have to understand that there is a big difference. So they have been taking its power away from Ukraine slowly and slowly, little by little, just exactly the same thing that they did in Africa. Okay. What they did in Africa was that they just gave Africa just enough so that Africa can survive, but they took away all its natural resources that they've been mining it for a long time. In fact, Congo and all these places, European uranium was being mined by France. Okay, France was mining uranium, but guess what? They never gave Congo a nuclear reactor. Imagine that. Hmm? One or two nuclear reactors would actually solve the electricity problems and all those things in Congo. But no. But anyways, coming back to the point here again. So my point is that the fate that Africa was facing, I mean, the problem that Africa was facing because of all this, I think that Ukraine is about to face the same problem. May not be in a colonial terms, but uh, overall, I mean, I think more of like sweet, like, because whatever Ukraine right now is left, that Ukraine itself consider itself part of the West. Now, since they consider themselves part of the West, so technically, ideologically, they are aligned towards the West. So they won't mind, but at the end of it all, what's going to happen? Your Ukraine will be exploited for by both parties, friendlies and foes at the same time. All right. Now, Ukraine legally renounces NATO. NATO legally bars Ukraine. Constitutional ban plus NATO rule change permanently excluding Ukraine. Okay, that's fine. Now let's move to the next one. NATO cannot station troops in Ukraine. Permanent restriction on foreign military presence. Okay. European fighter just stationed in Poland. Okay. Adjustment on regional security posture. US guarantee with caveats. Compensation to US response mechanism if Russia attacks, guarantee void if Ukraine attacks Russia. Basically, what this point is saying is that US provides the security guarantee only if Russia attacks Ukraine first. If Ukraine, let's say, decides to attack Russia in some way, then that guarantee is void. Nothing will matter after that. Let's say if Ukraine decides to drop a bomb or something in on Russia somehow, okay, then there is no guarantee. So if Ukraine is the aggressor, then there are no guarantees. This is the guarantee. Guarantee is basically a defense mechanism, not for the aggression. That's the whole point of it. Okay. Now, path to European Union membership, preferential market access, economic integration with Europe. So what they're saying is that Ukraine will get into the European Union, and then European Union will help Ukraine in building its economy. In fact, there are talks that whatever Russian funds that have been seized, which amounts to almost $100 billion at this point, that will go towards the Ukraine's development. Ukraine Development Fund plus rebuilding package. US Ukraine gas cooperation, infrastructure, minerals, World Bank support. So what all this is that there will be US Ukraine gas cooperation will be under that gas cooperation. What's going to happen is the US is going to help build or rebuild all the Ukrainian gas pipelines and all that, and fix all that basically, and build all the infrastructure, minerals, and all that raw material, right? The rare earth and all that, right? So all that basically is here in this. Now, this is the key part here. This part is the Russia's staged reintegration into the economy. Sanction relief, US Russia cooperation, energy, AI, rare earths, return to G8. That's what they're going to offer. And also, there is caveat to it that if Russia actually somehow decides to attack Ukraine, then all this will go back to normal, to its current state, what it is today. Okay. So, and the use of frozen Russian assets, $100 billion deployed for Ukraine reconstruction. Profit Profits split remainder into US Russia investment vehicle. Okay. So this is right here. Now, here's the thing you have to understand that all these things are being done or talked because everybody wants to move forward and they want to rebuild the economy. All right. And and in this whole entire thing, if there is anyone who is suffering or who is on the receiving end at this point, is Ukraine and the European Union. All right. So that's why they are on the talking table right now, and they're proposing all these things. Now, how much of it this will be implemented, we don't know, because this is just a draft that I'm showing you. Okay. But uh but the problem with European Union is that they will never come to the talking table if they believe that they are going to win. Okay. So right now, whatever they are doing, it's all face saving measures. That's what it is. Okay. So now, joint US Russia Ukraine EU Security Task Force, which will monitor enforcement body for agreement, meaning that they're going to build a task force where to provide the security into Ukraine and all that. That's all it is. Okay. Russia legislates non-aggression. What they're saying is that Russia will uh, basically pass a legislation that will say that Russia will not show any kind of future aggression towards Ukraine and whatnot. All right. And Ukraine remains non-nuclear, commitment to remain under NPT. Zaporozhye nuclear power plant restarted under IAEA. So Zaporozhye nuclear power plant will be started, but under watchful eye of International Atomic Energy Association. And power shared 50-50 between Russia and Ukraine. That's what it is. Because Zaporozhye Russians have captured it. All right, they have captured it. So what's going on is that since they have captured the plant, so but Ukraine needs electricity. Okay. So what they're gonna do is that they will do a 50-50 share of it. And this will be a leverage for Russians for a very long time. Now, European Union model minority and religious rights protections, rights for language groups, because European Union, Ukraine was basically killing all the pro-Russian population so that they can actually get rid of any kind of color revolution or something, if there is a possibility of it. Okay, And now, for those who don't know, I can tell you is that it was not Ukrainian government that was organizing all that. It was being organized by the, I would say, the globalists, or say more so the foreign elements. Okay, the foreign elements were organizing all this, from the Orange Revolution to all other color revolution that happened over there. All right. And why? Because they wanted to get rid of any pro-Russian population, so that there will never be a pro-Russian government in the Ukraine. Because what was happening is that every time there was a pro-Russian government in the Ukraine, it was toppled. There was a regime change, or either it would be a regime change, or they will just simply go and they would simply go and, what you call it, or they would just resign from it. So all that was happening. So when they talk about this point right here, they are saying that none of that is going to happen. If that happens, then there is a problem. And clearly, why Russians don't want this? Russians don't want this is because this is another leverage. Because Russian can use this population to have a regime change in their favor. Okay. Then territorial settlement. Territorial settlement, point number 21, is that Crimea, Donetsk, Luhansk are recognized as Russian, and Kherson, Zaporozhye, frozen buffer zone, and Ukraine withdraws from some areas. Basically, the major chunk of it is under Russia. Whatever Russia has captured, it's all under Russian control. Okay. And with because of all these reasons, what's happening is that these regions actually provide the land route to Crimea directly. Okay, but until now Crimea was not was accessible from Russia via land. So that's why Russians had built a bridge. Okay, but now they can access Crimea through land. All right, and Russians are not going to let Crimea go get out of their hands. So anybody who's thinking about it, keep dreaming. So now, no forceful change of future borders. It will only take one NATO expansion, and that's it. And this will happen. Make no mistake. Okay, Ukraine free use of Dnipro and Black Sea grain corridor. Okay, so okay, that's fine. Now Russia to guarantee transit and commercial access. So they just want to have this corridor access to Ukraine. Okay. Then humanitarian committee, we all know what that is. Ukraine hosts elections within 100 days. And this is when what's going to happen is the Zelensky is going to lose. Why? Because they will consider Zelensky as a loser guy. Okay. And he has, I mean, the Ukrainian population is going to kick him out. The real question is that what will happen to Zelensky after that? Okay. So full amnesty for wartime actions. Full amnesty meaning that it will go both ways, meaning that Zelensky will be forgiven, President Putin will be forgiven, meaning that all the ICJ arrest warrant and all that mumbo jumbo is all that is gonna go away. It had to be voided. Okay. So we'll see. Legally binding agreement monitored by Peace Council. There will be a Peace Council enforcement sanctions for violation. Like I said earlier, that this Peace Council is going to watch all this, and if say Russians decide to attack Ukraine again for some reason, then uh, all these things will be enforced. Now, here's the problem, and I'll get to it in few seconds. Okay, immediate ceasefire once withdrawal and terms agreed. Ceasefire activated as soon as implementation started. Okay. Now, question really here is that who is getting played by who at this point? Hmm? And then other question is that why European Union all of a sudden is agreeing to all this? Hmm? That's another thing. See, first thing first is that your European Union is agreeing to this whole thing because number one is the BRICS pressure. Okay, European Union's economy is collapsing. Pretty much entire Western economy is collapsing. The edge that they had, that was the consumer market, that is going away. That consumer market is now shifting to Africa, China, and India mostly. Okay, so European Union, if European Union does not really think about its future, then they will become obsolete as far as consumer market is concerned. Okay, and they have not produced lots of things in a long time. So because they haven't manufactured goods, consumer goods, in a very long time, so we're talking about a very long term inflation, economic downturn. Then they have illegal problems that is going to hurt their system, the democratic system, so called. Mm. Even though there is no democracy, they simply arrest the opposition leader and then they continue whatever they are doing. Then uh, your BRICS pressure. Actually, I lost my chain of thought. I wanted to say something, but anyways, we'll talk about that later on. So because the global South has been gaining momentum, okay, and because of all the consumer market in the global South, the manufacturing in the global South, then there are blocks like BRICS and your SCU and all that. So that's, and there is a rise of multipolarity, right? So because of all these things, they're worried. Okay. Now, what exactly European Union really want out of Russia is that, hey, whatever we couldn't get from Ukraine, why don't we just simply include Russia into our fold, bring them back into our fold, and then simply uh, this will at least help European Union regain their energy requirements and all that, because they were getting most of the gas and all that thing from Russia, right? So they need that energy. So all that renewable energy and all that thing seems like is not working right now. Hmm? So clearly you can see all this is bogus. So, and then you have geographic factor. Now the control of, like I said, the control of Black Sea, then you have Crimea. It all gives access to the Eurasian trade corridors. Now let's say if European Union is deciding to go back into manufacturing and all right, then they will definitely need access to these regions, the Eurasia, South Asia, Asia, Southeast Asia, all these things, they would need access. And to do that, the shortest route will be through the Black Sea and all that, right? So, so that's why that's another reason that they want Russia to mellow down, basically. All right. Now, the question really is that what Russians are going to do at this point. See, from the get go, Russians, when the Russia Ukraine war started, then what happened? Its impact was seen in the Arctic. All right. All the entire Arctic Council were disbanded. All the private investors, the Western investors that were investing into Russian economy in the Arctic, they all left because of the sanctions. So Russians went with their global South partners that, okay, all right, come on. Therefore, what happened? Polar Silk Road was born with Russia and China, India, and other collaboration. Polar Silk Road in the Arctic. Then Vladivostok Chennai corridor came out of it with Russia and India collaboration. Lots of those things happen. All right. Now, before President Trump's administration, the Biden administration, their strategy was that, okay, let's drag Russia Ukraine war so that at least Russians cannot progress in the Arctic. And Russians were saying that, okay, we are going to drag this, but we are going to make progress in the Arctic. And then when time is right, we will sooner or later get this stopped. And then after that, we will make progress in the Arctic again and speed that thing up. So what Russians are going to do is the Russians are going to, as soon as sanctions are lifted, if that happens, then Russians are going to speed up all their development process, whatever they are doing in the Arctic. Okay. And then have a proper backup plan, and then wait for the right time to strike again. Okay. Every time this happens, you may mark my words that every country that's out there is going to hedge their uh, economies against any kind of currency weaponization. Okay, that's why the trade in national currencies is taking off big time because of all these reasons. Okay, so what we see is that European Union, for them, actually reintegration of Russia into G8 and the global economy is the only way for their own survival. It's not like they're doing any kind of favor to Russia. Russians are just fine. Okay, so and this also actually what it does is that they are thinking that probably if Russians at least join, then they can slow down the BRICS development or BRICS progress, and trade in national currencies and whatnot too. And now, which I don't really believe Russians are ever going to do. Yeah, Russians are rarely going to actually move back their economy into dollar system. All right. So that's not gonna happen. In fact, I think that if the sanctions are lifted, then Russians are going to trade in national currencies even more so. Why? Because then they're going to get access to more countries to do so. All right. So you're gonna see this thing happening even more, as in the de-dollarization. Okay. So, and then other thing is that I think that other aspect of this, why European Union wants to do it, is because European Union basically, I think they want to move away from this whole label of Western Bloc. Okay. The Western Bloc mainly is the Western Hemisphere and all that, right? So they are saying that no, we're not gonna be called a US puppet or whatnot. We want to be our own bloc, meaning that they're accepting the multipolarity altogether. They're saying that okay, if India is one pole in South Asia, then China is another pole into Asia Pacific, and or South China Sea, say, and then and say Russia is another block, okay, then another pole, then European Union will be another pole too. European Union is not going to basically follow somebody's instructions from somewhere. Okay, so European, that's probably the attempt of European Union to separate themselves from the American policies and American politics overall. Okay, so slowly and slowly we may start to see that as well. All right, so all in all, Europe is just trying to survive the multipolar world order at this point. Okay, so this is it for this video, guys. I hope you learned something, I gave something useful to you. Please do like and subscribe, and I will talk to you guys in another video. Take care.